So Carl and I are going to talk about migrating your existing Dynamics CRM workflows from the workflow engine to Power Automate. And I imagine for a lot of people this will be a familiar and probably fairly timely topic. So hopefully we can um, enlighten you a little bit and maybe highlight some of the key features that you should be aware of. And if you do have any questions as we go through, obviously feel free to pop them in and we'll be about afterwards to have a chat. So just a couple of quick introductions. I'll introduce myself. I'm Ryan Maclean. I'm based up in Edinburgh in Scotland and I work for a pensions company up here. I've been working with the Dynamics platform for about, I think, 8 or 9 years now, working on every iteration of the platform from CRM 2011 right up to and including Dynamics 365. And a major part of the work that I'm doing right now with my company is migrating us from CRM 2016 on-prem to Dynamics 365 in the cloud. So actually, for me, this is my day job is working with all of the workflows that we've got, and there are hundreds of them, and trying to migrate those into Power Automate. So it's quite useful. I've popped some of my details on there in terms of my LinkedIn and my Twitter. I also blog relatively frequently on my website at ryanmclean365.com. So feel free to reach out and connect with me on any of these. And Carl, obviously, you can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Carl. I work for Avanade in the UK on
Sorry, my
typically
dog's decided.
typically enterprise clients. I've been working with CRM before Microsoft stole the name back in the 90s, and I moved to Dynamics CRM about 5 or 6 years ago. And this is where I currently am. And contact me on LinkedIn or Twitter or at my blog as well.
Good. So the first thing we're going to do tonight is do a bit of a feature capability comparison. And this is pulled directly from the Microsoft Docs website. I'll include a link in the slides to here, and we can talk it through. So we'll go through the different kind of aspects of the platforms for both Power Automate and classic workflows. So the first piece is around I guess modeling as it's termed. And so as you can see in the list here, there's a couple of areas where Power Automate and the classic workflow engine diverge. So they both support conditional branching, which is that kind of, if this, then do this, else do this. One of the key features I find really useful in Power Automate is the ability to do loops, and that is to do either kind of looping through a list to say, apply to each of these and do this action, or to do a do until. And I've used both of those in many different iterations. And that's something you could never do with classic workflows. And people who have tried to do that with various kind of workarounds have inevitably probably run into the infinite loop that kills your workflow. And so it's good that that's a native feature that we can do. One of the downsides just now with Power Automate is you can't do wait conditions on fields. There are some workarounds, and I guess it's probably worth noting as well that Power Automate is, constantly changing, and probably timely that today is the release day. So I'm sure there's some great new features coming out on the platform. So it's always worth kind of keeping an eye on those and seeing what's happening, and also just kind of keeping up to date with the doc site, because I always find when I go in, I'm like, oh, that connector looks different, or oh, there's some new features here. So it's always worth kind of referring back to that and following. I think towards the end we've got a link to some people we think you should follow and some learning resources, and obviously just keeping up to date with what's happening on Twitter. Parallel branches as well, if you're not familiar with them, are really useful. Where I find them useful is to do kind of like try catch errors. So it's really useful to be like to put an action in and then to have a separate action if your previous action fails. So if you're doing something that has the potential to fail, you can say, well, in this case, then this is what we'll do, or to be able to run two separate pieces. So that's super useful. And then also, one of the kind of big values of Power Automate is that it's, got the out of the box connectors to so many different systems. And I think at last count, there's over 340 different connectors available, which is kind of mind blowing. I think having come from, thinking back to when I was with CRM 2011, having to do any integration to external system just, brought me out in a cold sweat and gave me palpitations. And so the fact that it's so easy to do now with the out of the box connectors, but also that we can build custom connectors relatively easily as well without having to be too familiar with like the web API or whatever else. I think is great. The next piece is on the composition of your flows or your workflows. So clearly, I can't imagine anybody building a Power Automate flow or a classic workflow without some sort of dynamic content, and that is referring to the context of the record that you've triggered it from. It's saying I want to take this value and pop it in here. So, so it's great that they both do that. I can't imagine we'd have a very successful platform if it didn't. Um, Access to the pre-image of the event data. So that's typically, I guess, more in synchronous workflows, real-time workflows that you'd probably want that, but it can be really useful to do that. And that is to say, if this field equaled this before this thing happened, then do this instead. That's something I've done with it with other kind of plugins, and for any of the developer heads around, I'm sure you're used to doing that with within the kind of the event pipeline. Is to look for that pre-image data and do that. I know that there are people doing workarounds, and so if you look for Alex Schlega, who's a CRM MVP, he's done a bit of work around kind of using pre-images, and it may come future. I'm not too sure. Obviously, running child workflows or child flows, I guess, as they are in the Power Automate platform, can be so useful. And actually, I find that with the child flow capability, it's so much greater than it ever was in classic workflows, particularly the ability to pass parameters back and forth between the two. I find that great to be able to say, well, I want to kind of take these values from my flow, I'm going to send it off to this child flow to do some calculations or to retrieve some data or do something somewhere else, and then send back the result of that. That is super useful and something I used to kind of bang my head against. So although they both do child workflows, I think the value in Power Automate is that you can do so much more with them. So that's what's really useful. Running the common data service actions, this is the kind of the bound or unbound actions that you can have, or if you've created your own. So bound actions can be things like adding people to teams or removing people from teams, or qualifying a record, or closing an opportunity. They're all considered common data service actions. So it's good that you can trigger both of those. And then running custom workflow activities, I guess that was it was one of the hardest things for me to adjust to. I think, I remember speaking to Mark Smith, who's another CMVP, about a year and a half ago, and I was saying, I just don't know if I'll go to Flow because I don't see the value. And so many of the MVPs have built all of these great custom workflow activity solutions, and I'll refer to some when I get to a demo later on here, that I just can't see that. But actually, now that the platform's developing so much and so quickly, my need to go to those is diminishing ever more. And so it is something that's not available in Power Automate, but then the fact that you can create a custom connector to a custom API means that there's the ability to do so much more anyway. Grouping steps to run a transaction, so change sets are relatively new. I can't remember when they came kind of general availability on the platform. I'm pretty sure it was earlier this year. But that's the ability to say, well, I'm going to pop all of this into a transaction, and then if it fails, we can roll it back. And you could never do that within the classic workflow. So that's super useful as well. And I think Scott Duro did a great blog about kind of when they were kind of launched for the change sets. So I'd recommend seeking that out. And then approval workflows, again, something that people will commonly be used to. I'm sure if you've got customers, they've probably requested it at some point, and you've probably put in place some sort of workaround. But out of the box, classic workflows just didn't support that. And so again, it's so good that we can say, here's a flow, I want to send this thing for approval, and then it'll wait and it'll come back and it'll say, yeah, it's been approved, or no, it's been rejected, and we can do something with that. That out of the box functionality is amazing to me. And so I think I've been able to kind of get a lot of use out of that. And then we come to execution, which I guess is what a lot of us are really kind of interested in. So the first thing is obviously triggering on field change. So if you've been building your flows or you build workflows, obviously you're fairly familiar with the ability to say, I only want to trigger this when this field on my record changes. The second piece here, I've kind of popped an asterisk against the trigger conditionally on field value. So I've taken this table directly from the Microsoft Docs website, but I feel like you can do that with the ability to say, well, here's my my filter query, but also my filter expression. And so you can say, if I've got a Boolean field, I only want to trigger my flow when that Boolean equals yes. So I'm not sure that's definitely a no, and I feel like that's changing ever more. And obviously there's a few kind of more experienced heads than me on here, but I feel like I'm not wrong there. So if somebody can tell me that I am, that'd be great. But like I say, I'm with flows, if you use your filter query, your filter expression, you can then specify that you only want it to trigger when a field value equals X. With dates and stuff, it's a bit different, and there is the ability to do a bit of postponing until, but again, that's all kind of relatively new. Obviously, triggering on multiple common data serves entity events, so you can set within your filter query, I want to set it when any of these fields change rather than a specific field, or in terms of events, if it's create, update, delete, any of those kind of events can trigger your entity. Running on demand, obviously that's using the select a record and then trigger run workflow or click a flow, and you can do that. The run scopes again, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but setting the context into which the flow should run. Running on a schedule, super useful functionality again, and something I'll highlight in the demo that I'm going to show you is being able to trigger a flow and say, well, I want this to run, every hour or every day or every week or every month or every year, whatever that might be. That's something that I commonly got requests from people I worked with, and I'm sure you've probably experienced that yourself. And then the final one, the execution, is that, and the benefit, I guess, to the classic workflow is that you can still do synchronous or real-time workflows. You can't do that with Power Automate. I'm not sure whether it's ever going to come to the Power Automate. That seems to be a bit up in the air. And I guess the question is, for me, a lot of the time, I guess, I ran things synchronously because I could. I'm not sure it's always super necessary to do, but there are absolutely occasions in which I do need to do that. And so the first thing for anybody really is, if you're thinking about the workflows, to think, does it need to be real time? Or is a lag time of a few seconds or a few minutes actually probably acceptable? Obviously your use cases will determine that, but it's definitely something that you're going to want to kind of fall back to the classic workflow for. And then looking at the history, obviously you can do auditing of the runs on Power Automate, and I find that really useful, looking at that kind of 14-day history, and seeing the flow runs. And I think actually it's worth noting on the run analytics and the auditing of the history is Lynn Zawin did a blog post, I think it was last week, about creating a custom entity structure and then logging your runs in there. So that's something, if you want to keep longer than that 14 days, which comes as default, is probably worth looking into, is to say, well, we can take that flow run and trigger a separate flow to go and log that somewhere else. So that's something really useful. But actually the fact that we can look through the run analytics, and I do that all the time in terms of my I guess debugging of flows. I'll do a step and I'll run it, and then I'll look through that and see what happened and see where inevitably I've got an error, and then I'll be able to fix that. So those run analytics can be so useful. And as frustrating as Microsoft error messages can be at times, I still find that I get enough data out there that I can fix what I'm looking for. So they're very useful. And then the final piece here is just around author and portability. So obviously it's great that we can bundle flows into a solution, like we could do the old classic workflow. The advantage obviously with using flows is that modern designer and that kind of drag and drop interface. I know some of the kind of more developer kind of people in the community probably have their own frustrations with that, but it is really useful to me. And as a massive geek, I love the ability to be able to peek the code of each fin, see what it's doing with each step. I think I like to know how something works, and so I love the drag and drop interface. I love being able to visualize that. And as a blog writer, it's great to be able to take a screenshot of that and pop it in and then use that to kind of structure it, because that's much friendlier to users than code and when I explain it to people internally. But it's also just really easy to pick up and play. And so being able to teach people that, I find so much easier than it used to be with the old kind of classic workflow one. And the AI assisted authoring, I don't really know what they meant by that. I'm assuming it's maybe referring to a bit of the AI builder type piece, because I've never had the AI say, "Hey, have you thought we're putting this step in here?" I'm just imagining a kind of new version of Clippy in my head, which would terrify me. But that's kind of, I guess, an overall feature comparison. There are loads of other blogs that people do there. Like I said, I would keep an eye on Microsoft documentation, because Power Automate is it's an evolving tool. It's going to keep on improving. It's going to keep on getting better. And I think Craig highlighted at the start, Microsoft are listening. They're looking for ideas. So not just with the Dynamics platform, but with the whole of the Power platform. And so go and log your ideas or look for other ones and upvote them, because they do matter and they make a difference. And so if you've got something and you think, oh, I wish this was different, then log it somewhere or raise your voice, because it matters. So what I'm going to do is, Carl and I are going to take in turns here. We're going to talk about a couple of different demo situations in which we've got workflows that we want to migrate to Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform using the Power Automate. So I'll cover mine and then I'll hand over to Carl to do his. So So my situation, and this is something we have, is our sales team want to have an email every Monday morning at 9 a.m. that has a table of all the opportunities in the system. I know you can read that. I hate people who read slides to me, so apologies for that. But this is something that I'm sure you've all had it. It said, they could just log into the system and we could have a view. I totally appreciate that, but some people don't like doing that and they just want that email in their inbox to look at their phone on a Monday morning and say, oh, that's really interesting. So we had to kind of work with that. And so when I had in the old world, first of all, I couldn't schedule if workflows to run weekly, so we had to use a custom workflow solution for that, which is that recurring workflow runner. So if you're not familiar with that, I've included a link to it. Secondly, we couldn't create tables. So to create an HTML table, I had to use another custom workflow activity from Aiden Cascella to create a HTML table. And then thirdly, we couldn't email to a team, or we could only do it if we hard coded the references to it. So I had to use a third custom workflow activity solution to send that email to my team. So already I had to work around the limitations of the kind of old workflow builder for everything I was doing here, which is super frustrating. And it became my daily kind of life, I guess. I've got my job because I guess I was relatively good with workflows, but I got so used to the fact that I could just use these custom workflow activity solutions that I never thought about the fact that I was working around the limitations of the platform. But they were there and they were really useful. So the first thing really was to create a workflow. And so you can see there's 3 steps in this: 1, create a table; 2, create an email; 3, send the email to the sales team. And so creating that HTML table, I'm not going to go into the detail of this because it's in the past, but I just want to show what it looked like. To create the table, we'd pop in, if you can see down here, a fetch XML query that said go and retrieve all my opportunities created in the last 7 days, and that's how it worked. And we could do a bit of kind of basic styling here to create the table, or we could create views or whatever. But that was kind of it. We then had to go and create the table and then pop that output into the table, as you can see here, just at the bottom, that table query results piece. And then finally, we had to use that send email to team to pick a sales team which had a dynamic list of recipients, and then the system would send that email to them. So it's great that we could do that, and I was very happy that we had those custom workflow solutions. And then the final piece was that recurring workflow runner that Lucas Alexander had, which was being able to just say, I'm going to do a fetch XML. And this was a bit of a funny one because you can see here I had to basically do a fetch query to return a single result, and then I would use that to go and send an email that pulled it all out. So I used an opportunity record as a trigger, even though it wasn't related to it. So it was a bit of a hacky workaround, but it did work. And so that was kind of where we got to. But in the new world, everything that I'm using is just default out of the box actions, which is awesome. And so I've been able to kind of create scheduled flows. I can use list records to retrieve that list. I can use a create HTML table action to create the table, and then I can send an email, all within the context of this, all with standard functionality. And I think that's awesome. And so, this is the flow, and I'm just going to run you through how this flow was created, and then what each step does, and hopefully we'll get through that in time. Just double checking the time there. I think we're well on time, so I'll just get out of that and bring this across. So the first thing is, obviously we've got the scheduler here, and I'm just saying it's going to run at 9 a.m. every Monday. So I guess the only thing that's worth noting with this is that it runs at UTC.
Ryan.
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt. Very sorry. We've got a couple of people in the chat saying they can't see you demoing.
Oh.
I can. I don't know if people. I don't know. Are they seeing the slides or they're seeing the authoring and portability slide? Anybody else?
Let me stop sharing and reshare, and that might kind of reset it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
This is good stuff.
Glad you caught me there, Andy. Otherwise, I'd have been carrying on talking.
No, I just wondered if it was a problem for lots of people. So hopefully you should see the flow designer now, everyone. If you don't, I think it's probably on your side, and so maybe you need to just drop off and rejoin the call. Or move to Australia, as Neil Benson said. Sounds much more preferable. Okay, sorry, Ryan, crack on, okay. And we'll just get people to drop off and rejoin if they can't see it.
Yes. So as I was saying, the trigger for this is a schedule, and I've set it to my time zone of UTC. Obviously, we're in British summertime, so you just need to be aware of that when you are setting a schedule, that if you live anywhere that like we do, has a time change for summertime, then you need to make sure you're setting your time zone appropriately. But we set the start time. We've set it to run on a Monday at 9 o'clock. Super straightforward. The first thing it then does as an action is it goes and finds all of my opportunities. And actually what I'll do is I'll just zoom in here a bit because I think that might make life a little bit easier. Maybe not quite that much. So the list record step, and I'm using the Common Data Service current environment connector. Not that I guess it matters too much, but I like to make sure I'm using that one because it's the kind of the best one. So we pick the entity. In the select query, I'm just selecting the fields that I want to get returned. And I'd recommend that you do that. Limit how much information you're trying to get returned from your action, particularly with using something like a list record step. Don't try and retrieve stuff you don't need. It just slows down your flow and it's inefficient. So just think about what information you're going to use in your flow. You can always update this later, but try and keep it to the minimum possible because it'll make your life a lot easier. It'll make your flow more efficient, and debugging it'll be a lot easier when you're looking through the actual returned output. From a filter query, like anybody who has ever used this platform ever, I'm using the Fetch XML builder by Jonas Rapp to go and make a Fetch XML query, and then to give me the OData filter query that actually I need, because I'm not that good with OData. So if you don't know the Xrun toolbox and you don't know Fetch XML builder, I don't know how you do your job, but I highly recommend doing that. But basically all this is doing is saying, look for the values in created on and find me the ones that are created in the last X days, and the property value there is 7. So i.e. show me any that are created in the last 7 days. Because for this, when I'm creating the table, I want to show the name of the parent account. I'm also just doing an expand query step on that parent account ID field, and I'm selecting the name attribute there. So the output of this is going to give me 4 values. It's going to give me the name of the opportunity or the topic, the estimated close date, the estimated value, and the name of the account. And like I said, when we're looking at it, if you look at the returned JSON, there's quite a lot in there. And what we're really looking for is these kind of key values, so the estimated close date and estimated value. So we're going to try and pull those out so we can pop them in a table. So the next step for me is to use a select action on the outputs from there, and I'm just going to create a list here of key value pairs. And the reason I do this rather than creating an HTML table with those is because if you just popped in the create HTML table with the columns set to manual, you can't set the headers to have spaces in them. They're all one word, whereas if you do it this way, they will have a space in them. So if you're ever getting frustrated with that, where you're like, oh man, I've got to put in capitals and I've got to have a single line, use a select action and then pair that with a create HTML table action for the output of that and set the columns to automatic. This is your columns, these are your rows. Super straightforward. So I've just set the column headers, as it were, in the left in the key, and then the values to be each of the values that I've returned from above. And then we create our HTML table. The next step then is, because we want to send it to the sales team, I'll just collapse these to get them out of the way. I want to list the members of that sales team who are the users, and I'm going to use a fetch XML query to do that. So for the fetch XML query, what I'm saying is show me on the users where their team membership, team ID equals the sales team. So just show me anybody who's in the sales team. If you've ever been looking into it, so the team membership entity is a intersect entity between teams and users, and that's how you get that many-to-many relationship. So you're kind of skipping down through that, and that's why we have to use this rather than the filter query with OData, because we're skipping through a couple of link entities. Once we've got that, I'm going to initialize a variable called email addresses, and I'm going to use this because I'm going to loop through all of the team members, and I'm going to take their email address and append it to that with a semicolon, because that's what I'm going to use to send email. So all it's saying here is, give me all of those members of the sales team, give me a variable, an empty variable, and then loop through each of them, take their email address out and pop it into that variable separated with a semicolon. Once we've done that, we can then go and just create our email and send that to the team. So we use the Outlook send email action to that list of emails. And if you look at that, kind of what comes up, it says specify email addresses separated by semicolons. So it's already told me what I need to do. And that's why I've created that variable. Set my subject, and then I've set the table as an output action. And if I look through my history, you end up having something that looks like this with HTML, and it looks like this when you send it. And so now that's been super easy to do for me. And every week I'm going to get this email that goes out and says, hey, here's a list of all of the opportunities that have been created in the last 7 days. Here's the detail of it. Unfortunately, the create HTML table action is a bit limited in the formatting. So if you are interested in formatting, I've blogged about that separately. It's my most popular blog by a significant distance. So if you get any interest in doing any kind of fancy formatting on that, please go and read the blog. It's just called Power Automate HTML Table Styling. I think if you search Power Automate HTML Table, it's the first result in Google. So I'm doing something right. But go and check that out, and it'll give you some information on how we can do some fancy formatting in tables. And that's the end of my demo. So I'll hand over to Carl.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you all, and we're going to go from there. So hopefully you can see my flow. I'm just going to bring up my the presentation as well. So Ryan's very complicated and very well done flow was about ensuring that the things that you can't do in workflow you can do quite easily now. And one of the other things that I wanted to show you was approvals. So approvals are a standard within the flow, Power Automate, but there's also a connector with the email you can send with options into your emails, which allows you to do approvals for external customers. And this is the sort of thing that you get very consistently with charities or volunteer organizations that need to send out things to their volunteers or that anything you need to get approved, their timesheets, etc. And therefore, it's one of those things that if you're doing it in workflow in the old way, I'm not sure how you could do it. It would be a maybe similar to this, and I'm open to ideas how to do it in the old way. It may be a custom website, but in the new world, we can show the flow with a case creation update trigger, retrieve the approval from the account, send an email with options to anyone we like, not to do with our current environment or anything else, wait for that response, and then do what you want with the approval. And that's what I'm just going to quickly show you. Let me get here. So just for the sake of it, I'm going to manually trigger this, but the idea is that we're going to retrieve the contact that we want to send the email to, send them an email, and you've got this send with email with options action. And in here, you can do quite a bit with the formatting, but the most important bit is this user options, blue, red, and green. And if I had some custom text in here and send this away, while we were talking, hopefully I will get an email. Why is that not showing me? Come on. Because I've got it zoomed in. No, where is it gone? There it is. I'll show you that going through. So there's parallel action here as well, which is of interest. So if you go into that parallel action, what we're saying is that sometimes we can't wait for the 28 days to time out on this approval. We want to be knowing about it straight away. So we may give them a couple of days to respond and ask an administrator to chase them up. So we can do a parallel, and we can do action, which you can't do in workflow, and a delay. We're delaying, we're waiting for a week, and then we're going to send an email to an administrator with a comment on it saying that this guy's not replied. And that could be anything. That could be a chaser up to the sales department or the service department. And we're going to terminate that when we're done, mainly because we want to terminate this side as well. And on this other side here, we are just going to, this will wait. This will just sit there and wait until we get a response. So if I was testing this now, it would wait until we had the response, and then we can go through and look at the response that was received and do something on the record, which at this point is updating the contact. And if I just show you the email that gets received in my inbox, if I can find my inbox, I've received an email. It's already got my header, and I've got these three options that are presented for me nicely, and then I can select on these. So this is my Gmail account. So to get approvals working, the proper approvals working, you would need to be at least a guest on the person's environment and have the appropriate flow license. But here we're just, there's no connection between the two. I choose red, I get a nice little response and registered event, and we're good to go. So you can imagine this is quite straightforward and easy for that external approval on pricing, volunteers, etc., and something that would be virtually, well, it would be hard work in the normal scheme of things. It would certainly be a custom solution and custom website, etc., or you would have to use an email return and that sort of thing. So we're really using just the out of the box Power Automate. We've got to a point where we could have expanded our capabilities. So let me just get rid of that and go back to the slides. I've done that. So Ryan did it really quite well earlier and talked about your restrictions. And this is the key for you to know what you can't and can do within Power Automate that you could do in workflow. And we've already discussed wait for conditions on fields, and it's probably gone away now, is what we're saying. So we want to make sure that we don't need to use that. We redesign our logic to be able to get away with that. Use a schedule flow that Ryan did to conditionally regularly look for an update, and that will probably do for in the majority of cases. We don't need to know exactly when something changes. In the last hour or in the last day would probably be good enough. Pre-image events, yes, for logging of what it was and that sort of thing. That there are ways around that. There is a blog out there. I can't remember the title for, but really make sure that your usage of them is required, because at the moment it's not really that possible. We've discussed custom workflow activities that say they can't be done, but with custom actions, etc., we can do that now, and it's a great use of reusing your old and legacy code in your new flows, and be able to get that information in and out of the custom activities. We've already discussed conditionally. And the final one, the one that is probably stopping most of us that are in that old mindset from moving to flow, is the run synchronously. There's no way of stopping someone saving a record. There's no way of updating the record prior to it being saved. So all you're going to have to do is you'll get 2 saves every time at the very least. And that could be a problem. It depends on your workflow requirements, your business process that leads up to that point. But are Microsoft going to replace it? There is rumors that they are working on it. Whether they are and whether it will come to fruition, I don't know. But you've got to really look at your business processes and your understanding of the tooling to make sure that you need that before you start thinking about migrating those workflows. And in Microsoft worlds, they don't want to do anything synchronously. They want to push away that immediate interaction, etc., into the asynchronous mode to make sure that they've got the capacity to build up the platform and keep it running for us. So looking at your migration, now you should really be thinking of doing everything in Power Automate. You've got to think that if I'm building something new, why can't I do it in Power Automate? That gives you the great opportunity to do everything now, learn, educate yourself, and start thinking about those projects that you've been wanting to do, or your new bit of code, because eventually it will go away, and we're just always looking for the next step on that journey. And also start to think about your small things that you can do, those little things that are going to increase your knowledge but are not business critical, so that you understand how flow works, what the limitations are, and how you interact with it. We've already discussed these limits as well. So there's certain places for Power Automate and workflow, and there's only a few scenarios where they don't work, but know there. And I'm not telling you to go out and replace everything that's working now with new flows. Start with the new stuff. I've been on several projects where a replacement, new way of working has replaced something that's been working for years, and it's cost us thousands to replace it. and we don't get any benefit from it apart from a replacement of what was working before. So make sure you're using the new stuff. And finally, educate yourself. And on that note, some learning resources for you. Matt Collins-Jones wasn't on the call, I don't think, when I looked earlier, but he's the man, D365 Geek at the UK. His YouTube channel is spot on for learning, and he's got snippets and bits and pieces about anything and everything to do with Flow. The official Microsoft Learn site has got some great workthroughs and tutorials on how to start on your journey. Shane Young, his YouTube channel, again, has he goes into some very complicated subjects, but his manner and his approach to it all really does allow you to learn. And Flow Joe, an MVP, Joe Unwin, that's just moved to Hitachi, I think, in Canada. His series again is really digging deep into the finer detail of Flow, but it allows you to learn. And obviously there's the Power Platform learning resources across the whole of the suite. So when you share these slides with you later on, you can make sure that you've got all that environment with you. And we're ahead of time, I think. So is there any questions? Any questions? Anyone to raise their hand? Or
yeah, I've got a question for you. So in the past, I've written workflows that trigger incredibly frequently. In terms of Flow, you're limited to the number of runs. So what's your kind of view on making sure that you're not blowing that limit? And have you come across anybody actually inadvertently running out of flows or Power Automate?
I think for me, I have heard of people inadvertently doing it where they've created massive loops and not really thought about what they're doing.
Yeah.
I think for anything like that where you're running them so frequently or they're doing something, it's worth considering whether Flow's the right platform or whether it should be, moved to like Azure Logic Apps or Azure Functions, because they tend to run kind of batch requests and that kind of data at scale much better. And obviously, if Neil, I'm sure you're familiar, but for Power Automate, Flow is the kind of consumer side of Logic Apps, and so
Yeah.
a lot of times that can be scaled up, particularly thinking about enterprise scale. I think unless you've made a unless something's gone wrong, it should be fairly hard to hit the limit of your Flow runs, depending on your organization and your need. But and also I think it's worth going back to the drawing board in the scenario with. I think, like I said, my transition to Flow was really coming from a place where I loved the workflow engine. I picked up CRM by accident, like a lot of people did, and I wouldn't have the career I have now if it wasn't for the workflow engine, because being able to do all that kind of business automation and build out that business intelligence is what gave it to me. So I have a lot of love in my heart for the workflow engine, but you can't use the same thinking that you use for workflows that you use for flows necessarily. I think you have to kind of step back and go back to the drawing board a little bit and think about what the business outcome you're looking for is, and then think about what we're going to try and do with that. I think that to me is probably the best way, is to think about what we're trying to achieve and then look at the best tool for that, because it's not always going to be Flow, and so maybe it is looking at kind of building that out to like a Logic app.
Okay, thanks.
I think I'd second that, Ryan, is that it's another tool in the armor, the way that we had custom code, etc. in the old days, and we still do, but it's just another tool set, and we need to know the limitations, whether it's down to the performance of it or the flow runs, and know that there are options available to do that more in a coded way with logic apps or functions, etc. It's just another tool.
So we have got a few questions coming in the chat, and I'll pick up on a couple of them, and other people can grab some of this. So Matt's asking, he's saying this is more of a comment than a question, but it kind of sounds like a question to me, or a topic. I'd love to use Flow more, or more Flow in our stuff, but for me, it feels disjointed. I like going into logs in my same system.
Yeah, I like the idea of going into logs, but logs have moved on to Microsoft 365 now. You're getting the more interaction and more verbosity, reads, etc. So it's just using it's Microsoft bringing the best bits of each of the applications and utilizing it. So they're using Azure logging because it's a better tool and allows us to do all that interaction with it. They're using the Dynamics app for what it's best at, which is viewing and editing data. It's not a great log repository and never will be. So it's just trying to establish those boundaries about what you're using, and it's just the legacy of the application, the legacy of that application that's been around for years, and you've had your logging in it. Was that ever the best place for it? Was it ever nicely readable in a SQL table? It's never going to be anything that was worth doing, and it's always been a pain to report on. And there's ways of doing that now, which are not just via that logging.
Did that answer your question, Matt? Or shall we unmute you? I'm trying to look at how to do that, but
yeah, Rob, that hooking into Azure App Insights, yeah, they've said that the component framework is going to be logging into Azure App Insights. Power Apps is going to go into your own App Insights in 2020.
Oh, cool.
So that's one of the things they released today that I saw. So that would be great to combine it all.
Yeah, I've been looking at the Azure Functions, and they log into it quite nicely as well. So it seems like a good home for it all.
Yeah.
App Insights is awesome stuff. If you need to log anything, progress, errors, telemetry, it's massively scalable for all kinds of different stuff, not just this. I'm just going to ask another question, which is from Parvez. Hello, Parvez. I've not seen you for a long time, but hello. Will the when a record is selected trigger be available in the CDS current environment connector soon if it's not already?
I don't know if it isn't. I don't know whether I was just gonna have a look, but it's not something I've come across.
I don't think it's available in the CE connector currently. Andy, you're probably going to have a better insight to this than I do because you've got more of a direct line to the product group. So I don't know whether it's going to come, but I believe you can now include it in solutions. So before, like only a few months ago, if you included a flow that had the when a record is selected trigger in a solution, it wouldn't work in your environment, but you can now use that. So I think for me, I generally kind of default to the CDS current environment connector, but there's a reason. There's a reason behind the scenes. Presumably Microsoft have too, and I'm not privy to that. So
I think generally, like what I see, and I'm not a flow expert, Power Automate expert by any means, is that the CDS current environment connector is kind of the one where the effort is going. Obviously, the Dynamics 365 one is deprecated and rubbish. The current environment one has got sort of more functionality, and if it's not there, then that kind of feature is a big gap, and they know about it and they're working on it to fill it. I just don't know anything specifically to tell you about that.
And I think that's where they are disjointed, that they're not the current environment connector with its use of tables and to get out what you say, my parent account equals etc. is just painful for the average user that's not a developer to understand, and I think they need to fix that if they want to keep pushing this as a non-developer tool.
And this kind of, absolutely that point, this kind of thing where they have feature gaps where you can't do things like, stuff that you can do in workflow really easily, like regarding and, sending emails and stuff like that. They need this feedback from people. They hear it from people like us, but they need that real world feedback from people to say, actually, this is so simple in Dynamics. Why can't we do it in Power Automate yet? So that's where you get to the ideas thing that Craig showed earlier on, is, go and vote on ideas that are on there. It is, they're coming at it from a different angle with Power Automate, that it's kind of a platform of automation rather than it being an extension of Dynamics, which is like obviously what we'd like it to be. And so the functionality that we see is so obvious is not necessarily there yet, but they need to hear where they've got gaps, because they do fill them and they will fill them. It's this in the fullness of time thing that Stephen Siciliano says. We're not there. We're not at the fullness of time yet, but we'll get there as long as people keep asking for things. So give them feedback.
I don't think we'll ever get there. There'll always be something that we want. When we get this, we'll want something else.
Yeah.
And that's the joy of it.
I think Joe's asked a good question here. What's the best workflow you've built that you can't yet recreate in Power Automate?
It's a good question, Joe. So I think for me, it's probably not actually a flow. So I, as some of you probably know, I'm a big fan of North 52, and I've been using North 52 for quite a few years, and I've built some fairly advanced formulas in North 52, which is what I had to do because I didn't have flow. And so I've got a few of those that I haven't quite been able to get working in the same way, but I'm working through it. And I think a lot of it, I can't imagine there's any workflows I'd have in my scenario that I wouldn't be able to get back into flow, or to kind of reiterate, I wouldn't be able to kind of rethink the business logic behind what I'm trying to achieve. And I think it's about, for me, being output driven and saying, well, what outputs am I trying to achieve here? And then what can I do with the tool? And I think, obviously, Carl said, if you've got a workflow that's working, then until Microsoft give us a deprecation date, be aware that it's coming, but don't kind of bend over backwards and lose valuable productivity time trying to fix something that, trying to fix something that's working is a waste of valuable productivity time, in my experience. I think as the platform develops, more things are going to come, and the amount of times, even in the last, 6 months, I've looked at flows I've created and then been able to change them completely and kind of tweak out a lot of complicated logic to try and get something because the platform's developed. So I think I realize that's a waffly answer to your question, and it's not an answer to your question. But I just can't think of any workflows that I wouldn't be able to recreate, or anything that I wouldn't be able to do without maybe rethinking my approach to it.
For me, the only one is that synchronous piece. That's still the big elephant in the room. Until they give us an option to stop someone saving a record and interacting with it, I think that's going to be the one that I'm going to keep going back to.
Yeah.
I think there is a place still for things like plugins, but there's so Jay Howes has made a comment there that Power Automate will have its place, as do workflows in Dynamics, so long as they don't get rid of workflows in Dynamics. We should be safe. I'm very sorry to hear this, but they were trying to deprecate workflows this year in October, and they've backed away from that. It is going to happen as soon as they fill enough gaps and start getting comfortable with Power Automate, is what I would say. There's gaps around synchronous workflows. Maybe you start using plugins for that kind of thing, but you've got to embrace the technology. There are huge advantages to using Power Automate and all the connectors that are out there, and even simple things like iterating over records. Some things are just so much easier, but technology moves on, doesn't it? That's why we're all in this game.
I think just on that, Andy, sorry, Jesse just said she's not in the cloud yet. So I think that's if you're still on prem, it's not going to come out of your platform.
Yeah.
It's just being aware that when you do migrate, it's going to make your life a lot harder. So I think Jesse, I think I've spoken to you before about migration, but you should really be trying to push your company or your organization, as difficult as that might be, to really think about adopting or moving to the cloud, because right now I think migration is relatively straightforward, and I'm working with Fast Track to do that, and migrating from 2016 to the cloud-based version is relatively painless, as long as you don't have any crazy customizations in your system. But if you're moving to a system that has, from a system that has hundreds of dialogues and hundreds of workflows, and none of that's available online, your migration is going to be a total nightmare.
And they've have a history of removing features when we didn't have a suitable alternative. So, like dialogues.
Nobody used dialogues, Carl. Come on.
Well, they did. They were very useful for a lot of us.
Yeah. No. So I don't want to scare the horses there. It's not going away from on-prem, because you are completely in control of that. There is going to be a release for on-prem upcoming, it's not completely dead, but of Dynamics 365, I should say. But you will also get that long train, particularly with something like workflows, of a deprecation date. They normally give a date, and then it's a year from that date that actually things start going away. So they'll give you a date that says deprecation will happen on, let's say, October 2021. Don't quote me on that. That's a made-up date. In which case you'll have another year on top of that. With something like workflows, I can actually see you maybe having even longer than that, because Microsoft listen to their customers. They don't want to turn them off the platform. I'm just looking at the time. We've got a couple of things coming in, but I'm just looking at the time. Craig, I don't know if you want to come in and wrap up, and then we can go back to answering questions after that.
Sorry, got stuck on mute for a second. Not much to say, actually. I mean, you probably know more about this particular side than me, Andy, but David Yak has very kindly offered a discount on his course about Power Automate. So if you kind of liked what you saw Ryan and Carl demo, but you haven't quite got into it yet, or don't know how to get into it, like I said earlier, you can obviously, there's plenty of free stuff out there, but nothing better than going on a structured course to give yourself a real leg up. I looked earlier on his page, and I think it's over nine days or something it runs. It's quite a long, intensive course, and he's offering 25% off, I think, with this code. So if you just take the URL from the bottom, or take a picture of the QR code, or obviously we're going to make these slides available afterwards as well, so you can get it from there. Just leave it up a few more minutes. I know it always takes me a long time to get my phone to the point where it'll recognize a QR code, and Android phones don't seem to be quite as good as iPhones for that. Okay. If anybody wants to come back to that later, just let us know after the session's ended, and I'll bring that slide back up.